Right, what I'm going to talk to you today basically is I'm going to try and get over to you passion for engineering, obviously, but I'm also going to try and put across to you my passion for bone, because bone is a fantastic material. If we could just do this much for a material that was like bone, it would be absolutely amazing. Now, all of this work I'm going to be talking about is actually done here in this lovely city of ours, Stoke-on-Trent, and more importantly, with my good friend, Prof. Pete Thomas, an orthopaedic surgeon based at Stoke. Isn't he lovely? There he is with one of our babies. Now, how did someone who was, yes, I'm not scared to say this, bullied at school just for having a foreign-sounding name, used to race lawnmowers, used to do amazing equations and computational methods for designing power stations to make sure they don't shake themselves to bits, get to become a professor in medical engineering? Let's find out. Well, first of all, it's absolute chance. This is my door. I was on summer duties one year and a phone was ringing in an office. Now, summer duties basically means clearing, so there could be a student. So I answered the phone. Wasn't a student on the end. There was someone talking to me in a language which sounded absolutely what I understood, and I thought, I can help this guy out. But I actually knew nothing about broken bones or orthopedics. But one thing I did know is that bones break. They do, and they break every day. The bone we're going to be talking about is the tibia. My lovely assistant is demonstrating. You would call it the shin. And there's what I prepared earlier. As you can tell, it's broken. But I can hear you now. No, you're an engineer. What do you know about orthopedics? Well, my philosophy for engineering, and particularly engineering design, is very simple. I have to know absolutely everything about the area in which I'm designing to produce a design that works. If I don't, then I'm afraid, there's no excuses. You need to know it. So I spent the last 25 years learning orthopedics. Now, you might be surprised to know that actually there's 430 people per million head of population per year across the world who will need an operation to mend a broken tibia. And that's just a fact. The highest at risk are basically young adult males, probably playing football, probably riding a motorbike or doing something just as stupid. Unfortunately though, if you're young and you're female, doesn't mean you're immune. You can still break a leg. But luckily for you, bones have evolved over millions of years to heal. They do it really, really, really well. My job is to design something that helps the bone heal, not gets in the way. The long bone we're talking about, tibia, is a long bone. It heals by callus. Now, callus is another wonderful thing. It's nature's glue. Think of like a hot glue gun. If you can imagine a hot glue gun in your head over the next bit, you'll understand what I'm on about. The thing probably that you won't think about is that actually it's got to have movement. Well, movement means this. The ends move together and it releases callus. And that callus builds up until it actually comes to halt. That's when the bone is stiff enough, that's when it's healed. And there's one we've prepared earlier. Notice the lump. Now, on average, it takes about 18 weeks for a tibia to heal. Can be as long as 24, it can be as short as 8.5 weeks. But what I can tell you is if you smoke, you'll delay it by at least 4 weeks, and you can stop it altogether. There's the cameraman, he smokes, that's his reason to stop. Now, what about that lump? Well, your body remodels itself continuously over your whole life. And the way it works is that you have these little cells called osteoclasts. They're nature's diggers. They go around looking for bits of bone that aren't needed and they get rid of it. Osteoblasts are the opposite. They lay down bone just like a builder where it's needed. And it all works under something which is called Wolff's Law, and it's very simple. Where a bone is too big, osteoclasts get rid of the bone and ship it off somewhere else. Where a bone is too small, it lays it down and we end up with an optimum solution. If you've got a small load, you'll have a small bone. If you've got a big load, you'll have a big bone. This is one of the reasons why astronauts have to exercise in space. Because in space, not only does no one hear you scream, but also there's no gravity. And because there's no gravity, there's no load on the bones, and those osteocytes thinks it's party time at the buffet. So if they don't exercise, when they come back, it won't be a pretty sight. Let's get back to mending tibias. If you're unlucky enough to go to hospital with a broken leg, the first thing is they'll say, is it a stable or an unstable fracture? A stable fracture is basically one where if you load the ends come together and nothing very much happens. An unstable fracture has got a more complex shape, and if you load it and the ends come together, ping, off it goes in a different direction, and one leg ends up shorter than the other. There's that example again. Stable fractures, you'll have seen them in plaster casts all over the place. Unstable fractures need a bit more support. They need metal work, and there's an example. It's an external fixator. It's called external because it's outside the body, and fix means it's mending it. The bit I want you to look at is the bit in the middle, because that's before we started our work. And we're going to see that again in a moment. It's got to come off. And the way most surgeons would do it is they'd look at your x-rays, they'd look at manipulating the fracture. Unfortunately, those methods are pretty inaccurate, which means that the most common occurrence is someone says, come back in a few weeks, you might be ready then. Which to an engineer is like a red rag to a bull. It's a bit like saying, I'll turn on that nuclear power station, and if it hasn't blown up by next week, it's okay, it's going to work. No, I want numbers. So there was obviously room for improvement. Now, Peter and I soon realized that actually those fixators perform two jobs and not very well, so let's divide them into two. The first job is reduction. That's basically bringing the bones back into alignment. Now, you're probably imagining it's something really sophisticated. I did. No. It's actually a very large assistant pulling on someone's leg for about an hour. And I'm not joking. So there was clearly something there. There it is. There's our mechanical assistant. We call it Storm because it's this Staffordshire, notice where it's been designed, orthopedic reduction machine. Now, what's it done? Before and after. It's not too difficult to see what change we've made, because the one that was done with Storm, you can't even see the fracture site. The other thing is that that fixator doesn't need any joints anymore because it's all in the other part. We're not the only ones who like it, other people do. The only trouble is, I think we must have had too much to drink because we just cannot remember what we were laughing at. Now, the second job they have to do is, it's in the title, it's fix. That's our little baby, but it hides a lot of complex stuff. Inside there, there's an optimum environment for callus formation. Not only that, the callus is formed by people walking. Notice that they've got normal shoes on and normal trousers. In fact, most patients walk the next day after operation. The way it happens basically comes from, if you draw a graph of strength to weight ratio, anything that's got a high strength to weight ratio, and there's too much material, will be up above. Spiders' webs are really good, they're down the bottom. That's where the ios would be. Not a piece of material is wasted. Same thing goes if the patient's going to wear it, you need to be functional. Scorpions, brilliant, adapted, not very pretty as far as I'm concerned. Spectacles, however, everyone has got to wear them, you pick them. Patients like ios. That's still got to come off. We used to use really difficult equipment to measure the stiffness of the fracture accurately, but it was very time-consuming and cumbersome, so we built it into ios itself. If those pins don't touch the side when you manipulate it, the fracture's healed. If it does, then it's not healed. 400 patients in Stoke have been assessed with that now, and it works beautifully. No wires, no computers, but they still have to come back to clinic. Now, are they walking where they're supposed to? Or are they? We don't know when they go home. So we started monitoring them at home. There's a little thing, collects the data, and we end up with a graph that looks like this. At the beginning, not very much is going on because it hurts. At the end, it's tailing off because the fracture's healing. But they still have to come back to clinic to get the data. Why am I bagging on about this? 60% of clinics involve someone just saying, you're fine, come back in 4 weeks. They're redundant. It'd be much better if they don't have to. You could do that on the telephone. So we've started going to Internet of Things technology. There it is on someone's, what it would look like on someone's leg and what it would look like when someone's walking. It will send the data up to a computer, and that computer will then send the data back to the patient or the surgeon. Now, if nothing's awry and everything is going to plan, does that patient have to come back to clinic? No. They can be rung up and said, it's going very well. In fact, they could look at it themselves. Ta-da! 60% of clinics gone. 60% of clinics gone means that people don't have to take days off work to take their friends or brothers or sisters into hospital. 60% of clinics gone means there's less traffic. Less traffic means there's more parking. Less traffic means there's less CO2 emission, and the number is enormous for a clinic. That's the estimate for one clinic for 1 year. Now, I've gone full circle now, because at the beginning, I was using complex equations to model power stations. I now use those same equations to model how fractures heal. In the late 80s, early 90s, I actually went to an esteemed panel and I proposed that we could connect all the power stations together in the world, send the data to a host computer, and that host computer would analyze all of that and better predict what was going on. I was laughed out of the room. They all went, sending data over the ether? Are you mad? Well, if only they could see me now. Boy, am I glad I answered that phone. Thank you.